Sitcovsky, a clinician here at Focus Center for Autism, and we're here for Life on the Spectrum. Usually I'm a co-host with Donna Swanson, our executive director, but today I am the host. Focus Center for Autism is an organization, nonprofit, that serves the autism community. We have a school, 2 residential programs, and usually we serve clients aged between 10 and 22, though we're looking to get into more services for people a little older than that as well. And today our guest is not a client. We usually interview clients, but today we're interviewing one of our staff members. So today we're talking to Mr. Nick, and can you kind of describe to us what your role is here at Focus and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Nick Ruel. I'm serving currently as a music and special education teacher at the Fresh Start School. Last year I was teaching assistant, so I'm going into my first year as an actual teacher with the program.
So how has that changed your roles changed? Has that changed your experience of what it's like to work here and what you're going through?
Well, not gonna lie, the change was challenging. Not necessarily in a bad way. I like a good challenge. It was challenging because you're going to a different role and a lot of the responsibilities change. It's a change I did want, though. One of the things I love about Focus is no pun intended, but the focus on the actual students themselves and their progress and how individualized it is.
Yeah.
And for that, it's like there's something as a teacher I can get in a public school.
Yeah.
So for that, it's great.
Because from your experience, or have you ever worked in a public school, or just being in public schools?
Yes, I've had experience in public school, mainly between student teaching, and I teach a lot of high school marching band, and I teach drum corps, so I have a lot of experience between teaching high school kids in and outside the classroom setting. I had experience with that. And public school is great because you reach a wider audience, but it's very hard to focus on an individual student because you have so many that you're focusing on.
Yeah, because I've noticed that a lot of our clients, right, they might fall through the cracks because they might not have all the time these external behaviors, but they might be falling behind or might be quieter, like depression. So it's harder for them to get the services that they need. So you say it's different for you. From your experience, it's been different here that the kids, you feel like they're getting their needs met more.
Yes, absolutely.
As a teacher, is it easier to meet the needs of the student?
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things. Even in high school marching band, when I was working with programs, there's so many kids that fall through the cracks. And I taught over by Dartmouth in New Bedford, and the high school was in the middle of the projects. And it's one of those things where the school's wire fencing, and it's one of those communities where the kids are great, but you can really tell they fall through the cracks. There's so many students you have to take care of. And as a teacher, it's hard because you want to do everything you can for all your students. Yeah. And when you can't, that's hard to, not gonna lie, it's really hard to deal with that.
And it's hard to, because sometimes public schools couldn't get a bad rap for this, we're not providing the services, but it's just how it's set up, right? It's when a teacher has this many students, it's not necessarily the school system, it's not necessarily the teacher, it's hard to individualize and meet the needs of especially these students.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love here is I have less students, but I feel like that I'm making a bigger difference because I know when I'm teaching a geometry class, I might only have 2 students for geometry, but I know I'm really taking the time to individualize what they need. Where if I was teaching geometry class to 20 or 30 kids, and maybe I'm teaching multiple sections like I would if I was teaching in high school, it would not be the same experience.
How many students do you generally have on your caseload for teaching?
So right now I have 3 students in my caseload, and I don't have quite as much because I'm a newer teacher, of course. But that also ebbs and flows depending on the enrollment in the school. COVID has kind of impacted things a little bit with that too, so it's been hard to enroll new students.
But you do have, so you do have the 3 under caseload, but you also teach other classes too, right? So more general or
Yes, and it's funny enough is even though I'm 3 on my actual caseload, I really feel like I have all the students on my caseload because you teach them in all your classes, and you get so involved with every single one of them. And I have meetings with the other teachers, with the clinicians, basically every day, and we talk about every single student. So I know what's going on every single one. Like as if I was their case manager. So for me, it doesn't really make a difference. It's just I do entitle, but still feel like they're all students that we all.
When I think of like in public school, because a lot of times the kids we have might be able to do well in school, but just the other things that undermine, or depression, anxiety. Anxiety is a huge thing for pretty much everyone here. That's why they might fall through the cracks. And you know, in a classroom where you have 30 kids or 20 kids, and you have different periods, you know, and so many different kids you're worrying about or teaching to, it's hard to meet those needs. So like you said, you're meeting like every day, and you only have a small caseload, so that makes it easier to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also nice too because with the private school setting and with a smaller school, we can really focus on those clinical needs as well. And I like, because as a teacher, I'm really taking those clinical needs and putting those into my daily practice as a teacher. So for example, great example is for kids on with autism spectrum disorder, they have a harder time relating to other people, thinking outside of their perspective. So a lot of things I've been doing for US history, for example, is we're talking right now about the causes of the American Revolution and the conflicts between the original 13 colonies and the King and Britain. My activity I had for them was I had them go in the shoes of the King, in the shoes of the colonists, and go, okay, here's what's happening. How would you, in this period, how would you feel about
having
this?
to take that perspective, what the other person might be
Exactly,
feeling.
and not only is it helping to relate to the content better, but it's also helping them practice that skill of being able to see outside of themselves, look at evidence and clues, and then draw a conclusion, be able to infer how someone might be feeling, which is a skill that doesn't come quite as easily for them.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, is connecting everything. You know, this thing you might be learning in social thinking connects to history, you're kind of connecting it like the history lesson. Like, how would someone in this situation feel? We talk about that a lot, because I'm a clinician here. I also work in school, and I do like social thinking at work with our transition students, and it's kind of like going through these situations, how you might feel. So how someone else might feel if you're acting this way. So I think it's cool that you're doing that. I didn't know that for like history, trying to put yourself in the position of that person. It is kind of honing those skills, those social skills too, while also connecting it to the history.
Yeah, and it feels nice as a teacher because when I'm doing these activities, I know that it's making an impact on building their social skills. And you see it further too, because when you do other activities like that, they get better and better at it and go, oh, you know, a student goes, oh, they might feel like that. Before you ask the question, they're already making that point.
Yeah,
and it's starting to get them into that mentality.
Yeah, and I think another thing with people with autism is they don't have social skills. That's what you might hear. They don't know how to, but it's more, I always think of it as maybe it doesn't come as naturally.
Yeah.
But it's not like people can't learn. It's just not as natural of a skill. So like you're doing, practicing it in even like a history course, you wouldn't think of as like social thinking. It's important because it's all the practice is so important for them.
And that's one of the things that I learned very quickly is that they're all very capable. They're all very capable in different ways, but they're all very capable. And like as a teacher, it's nice because I know, like especially here, I can push them and challenge them, of course, in a comfortable and appropriate way, because they all deal with different new things in different ways, some positive, some negative. But I know that I can push them to be better people, and they've proven to me before sometimes I can push them more.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing is we try to create a comfortable environment. I feel like a lot of times students, like you're talking about public schools, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for anybody. Think of huge hallways, lots of people walking around. Transitions are also really difficult for people with autism. And having all those, especially when I think, because we have students who are generally like middle school or high school at our school or transition, they would be in that type of setting where it's bigger. So thinking that how overwhelmed they must be, how can you sit down and focus on work and it's not comfortable? Sometimes people don't feel safe. So what do you think about the environment we try to create that helps?
So it's interesting you bring up transitions because that's something we have been working on a lot this year.
So even in a small environment, it's still difficult?
Oh yes, we still, we have our 4 core subjects in a row right in the morning. And we're still having, even 2 months school year, they still have a hard time with transitioning from class to class. And if you get 5 minutes between, really it ends up being more like 10 minutes, if we're lucky. And a lot of that is because it's hard to get off of one task and then go to something new.
Kind of get stuck on that task. You notice is that most students, or just like some of them, and then some hold up the other students?
It depends the situation. Most of the time, pretty much all the students are, but sometimes students, you get the question like, okay, and they transition right away. And sometimes it depends on the subject. Some of them is hard to transition because it's something they're not as comfortable with.
Yeah.
Sometimes they transition really quickly because they love that subject.
Oh, I'm ready for it.
So yeah, exactly. So, but we've put structures in place. So for example, we have lockers this year for middle school and high school students. And they each have their own locker and they each have their own folder for subjects. So the idea is when they're getting ready for class, they go and grab the stuff for that class in the locker, and they go and grab their folder.
So kind of making it more routine, that to just get used to that.
Exactly, and I learned very quickly they need routines and structure. And that's what's gonna help with the transition, so that's what we've done.
Yeah.
But also giving that loving push of, okay, we have 5 minutes left for snack. Okay, we have 3 minutes left for snack. You guys need to start putting things away, you start getting your stuff.
Yeah.
And giving those cues and reminders, and we're ready for class. I'm like, all right guys, I'm ready for class. And if they're not ready, we'll look at them like, well, you know, you had 5 minutes to get ready for class.
Yeah.
And, you know, and look at them, give that gentle push and go, okay, so next time what can we do to make sure that we're ready on time?
But you have that relationship with them, right? That's already built in, so you feel like comfortable being able to push them.
Yes.
Because if you had a negative relationship with the students, right, it might be difficult to kind of get them to.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that made transitioning from teaching assistant to a teacher a lot easier.
Yeah.
Was that when you go into a new teaching job, it's always nerve-wracking because you don't know the students you're getting into. But this is a great case where I knew every single student already because I've worked with them for a year. It's just that my relationship with how I'm interacting with them every day changed. Instead of being a teaching assistant helping them through, I'm the one teaching them materials.
Yeah.
But it was nice because I knew all the students, I was reading IEPs, and I was like, I know these students.
I know them, I know what they should be working on, but this is more formalized about what they should be working on.
Exactly, so it made me really confident and comfortable jumping right into it and going, okay, I know this student, I know how to structure this class so these students can be successful because I built that rapport.
And they feel more comfortable with you. So when you started with us, it wasn't like, oh, we have this new teacher. It's like, oh, it's Mr. Nick. We know him. I know him very well. And that made it, did you feel like it was easier for them to start with you this year?
Yeah, for sure. It was funny because when we told them, it was a very easy conversation. You just went, oh, okay. And that was kind of it. Because even for a couple of students, last year I helped teach a couple of classes. For example, one of our students, I was teaching pre-algebra 2 separately. Yeah. And so they kind of were used to me teaching a couple things already. Yeah. So when I told them, oh, I'm on as a teacher and I'm teaching with Miss Erica, they went, oh, okay. It was just like, they just accepted it. It was fine, and that was that. And it hasn't really been a problem. So
more of the stress for you being a new teacher has been like the lesson planning. How do you get everything right? Because I know a lot of teachers, and that's like.
If you ask any teacher, the bane of our existence is prep periods. Yeah. And it's hard too because I've been trying to as a teacher this year, finding a balance of, I have to make sure I'm prepped for time for class. I'm in grad school right now, so I got to make time for that. And I also don't want to be the teacher that's in their office the whole time and not interacting with the kids. Yeah. So it's about finding a balance with that, but still making sure that I'm prepared for them to be successful. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest challenges, but I think I've been tackling it okay so far.
But it takes time to learn it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're new at this, and it's like any role, right? Learning the best way to do it.
Well, like I have to get in a routine too. So like, now that I've gotten into routine, it's gotten a lot easier, but it took a couple weeks for me to get into the routine. Thankfully, I have good staff working with me that help me through that. And I have enough experience as a teacher where I'm able to figure it out. If I was in public school, I might have gotten a little more overwhelmed.
Well, I think it's an important point too, is like a lot of times people with autism are like othered in a way, like, oh, they have these problems, not in like, we don't have these problems. They're like neurotypical. But it's like, it just might be to a different degree, right? So it's like, I have anxiety about things. We learn these coping skills, or we learn these social skills that we might be able to manage it better, but we still, like, routines help anybody, right?
Yeah. The way I like to put it is, I put this to my roommate a couple weeks ago, is that people with autism deal with the same problems that we do. They just handle it in different ways. Yeah. And a lot of times those ways are not healthy. So, and a lot of it is teaching them, there's a better way to deal with this problem. Let's help you find a strategy to deal with this problem.
What is it like for you teaching a class with, because if you meet one person on the spectrum, you met one person on the spectrum, everyone's different, and even if you're in the same grade, maybe different levels or different interests, how has that been for you, learning how to navigate the different personalities, even if it's a small class, and meeting them where they're at and getting them where you want them to go? I know it's a process, but...
Well, and it's like, sometimes I joke that I feel like I have multiple different personalities, because depending on the class depends on my personality. For example, I have one student for middle school science, and it's a student I have better rapport with, where I can roast him, I can be more sarcastic, so I can be that way. But like in other classes, some students, sarcasm is whoosh, right over the head, they don't get it. So like, I'm never gonna use sarcasm in a class like that. So again, that's an example of where you have to know your students, know the rapport, but you also have to differentiate not only what you're learning, but also how you are as a person to them too. Because if I was the exact same for every single class, that would get pretty boring as a student pretty quickly, regardless of whether you have autism or not.
Yeah. I mean, we all act differently around different people too, and it's important for them to know that as well. It's like, sometimes it's hard to like, well, this is, like a classic thing people say, but people with autism, they don't get sarcasm. Some kids do. It's like, again, you met one person on the spectrum, or with autism, you met one person with autism.
I mean, I've also met people that don't have autism that don't get sarcasm.
Yeah.
So like, that's not even, it's just maybe it's more common for them to, but that doesn't mean that only people with autism don't get sarcasm. And everyone else that does autism, everyone gets sarcasm.
What's been like some of the most rewarding things from the start of this year for you? I know you're still growing as a teacher, but it's like any like wins, you think like, oh man, that was like a great day or something.
I have little victories. I think all teachers have little victories, and one thing if you're a teacher, is that it's the little things that count up and matter.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I had a student, again, in science, was really struggling with a concept, and it took me like 4 or 5 different ways to explain something. But by the time I finally got to way 5, and I was doing my own worksheets by this point, it's like, all right, I gotta do my own thing. And he it snapped him, he was like, oh, I get it. And he did it, and I was like, oh, yes, you get it, okay. Yeah. Or teaching music appreciation history, for example, when they mention something, they remember something. And you go, wow, I didn't think you could remember that. And like, when something sticks with them and they find it important, or like they're researching on their own or doing stuff, it lets me know that as a teacher, if they don't get everything, that I'm at least making a positive impact. Yeah. And those are the little things that stick with you.
You have to have that, right? Because it is a hard job. Any teacher, it's a hard job. Being a clinician is a hard job, or working with students, especially when these kids are going through a struggle, and it's also, it takes a while for them to be comfortable, even if they know you, or knowing that about students and how they have trouble being in a classroom possibly, or interacting with students, and having to navigate a classroom could be the hardest thing, and they might know how to do the work, but not how to be in a classroom. So it's like, knowing that about students, everyone's so complex.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that you kind of started touching on, is that I've learned very quickly that being flexible is so important to teacher. And we're very flexible at Focus in general, especially at the Fresh Start School, but like every day is new challenges. So like, for example, we had a couple weeks ago, we had the electricity problems because of the rain.
Yep.
And who would have expected that to happen, right? Yep. But we had to be flexible in our planning and go, okay, so how are we going to adjust for this? Yep. And you have to ask the students to be flexible too. So challenge for them, but it's also a challenge for us. But
so if we're asking them to be flexible, we should be flexible too.
Yes. So like, for example, today we had to move math over somewhere else. And it was not in a classroom we normally have it. I didn't have a whiteboard. And sometimes students are going, why are we having a math different place? And I'm like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But I'm like, hey, I was like, how I have to be flexible with things sometimes. Like, I need you to be flexible and help me with this. And they go, oh, okay, and they understand.
And it's also knowing the students, it can be difficult because some of them are at different places just by how long they've been with us. So sometimes, we even say it sometimes takes a year or more for people to become comfortable. Maybe they had negative interactions at schools or with different staff, and they don't want to trust. So it takes a while for them to feel safe in this environment that they can really start learning. And that could look many different ways. So but sometimes they'll be in a class with someone who's been here for like maybe 2 or 3 years, and they totally feel comfortable with all staff, and it's like, how do you navigate that in the classroom? Like, there's so much going on in your classroom.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to not only being able to individualize for each student, but it also goes back to rapport with students and what you know about them. And Like some students, I know like I can push a little further to do something, but some students, like depending on the day, sometimes they vocalize they're in a bad mood, you see, and go, okay, let's approach this a little bit differently, let's take a step back for a second.
So like avoid those power struggles.
Oh yeah, it's, the last thing you want to do, especially as a teacher, even regardless of special education or not, is you never want to get in power struggle with a student. Because it never ends well, and it's a lose-lose situation.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, it might solve the problem temporarily, but in the day, you fracture a relationship with the student, and it really doesn't solve the problem, the initial problem that caused it.
And you had mentioned it before, it's not like we're giving into, like, oh, the student can do it.
No.
It's that loving push you're talking about. So when you build that relationship, right, you can nudge them, you know, a little bit. You should,
and sometimes it's not what you say as much as it's how you say it.
Yeah.
So, for example, sometimes we have a student who's like, I'm not gonna do this. And it's like, okay, well, it's your choice. I was like, you know, your choices do have consequences, but I like you to make the good choice. Or even sometimes as simple as saying, well, you know, I know it's your choice, and I have good expectations of you, so I know you can make the right choice.
Puts it more on them than coming from an external person telling them what to do.
Yeah, and it's just as much, and knowing and getting them to realize that it's just as much as them as it's on us.
Yeah, but before we end, I know we have like a few minutes left. So talking about being flexible for a teacher, I think that's so important. It's important to have the lesson plans and have that all planned out. But like, has every lesson you've done worked out exactly as you
No, and if a lesson goes exactly as planned, you need to record the time and date because it'll never happen again. It never goes to plan. I think for every lesson, I have like a plan A through G for everything, and it's good I do because usually you end up going to plan B or C usually.
And I think a thing for me too is not taking it personally.
No. When
a lesson doesn't go as it's reflecting on it, right? So like I'm sure you've had class where you're like, well, that did not go well.
Well, and sometimes like you want to get discouraged teacher because you didn't get as far in an activity as you wanted to. But sometimes you have to consider that the pacing is not always going to go the way you predict, especially in special education when people are dealing with different struggles and needs. Sometimes kids struggle with things that you did not think they were going to struggle with. And sometimes it's good for me as a teacher because I'm like,
could have had a bad weekend.
Could have a bad weekend, or sometimes there's a problem underlying that you didn't know about until you present a certain subject or type of activity and they struggle and you go,
that's new.
I didn't realize that. So like, for example, today music class, we were doing a unit between 1900 and 1940 on America's identity in terms of music history. And for their project, I had to create a playlist of 10 songs. And it had to be from that era, from artists that we talked about, or musicians that we talked about. And I realized very quickly the first time I tried doing that lesson last week, or a couple weeks ago I should say, that they did not really have the ability to look up things on the internet the way I thought they did.
You just assume because they're younger.
I assumed because they were younger that, and they use technology a lot, they were able to do that. But you know what? They weren't.
Yeah.
And you know what? I could have been taking it really personally as a teacher, but what I realized is, okay, I need to approach this differently because I realized they don't actually have the skill. So I changed my focus of the assignment. I gave guidelines to help them more with the assignment, and I took it as a learning opportunity. But you can't take it personally because a lot of times even if you plan, if it doesn't go as planned, something you can learn from it.
And with this population, people with autism, the nice thing, you have to learn not to take things personally because they will tell you. There's less, generally you'll see less of a filter, so you'll get it blunt. If the lesson did not go well, you won't just think it to yourself, they'll tell you that the lessons. So it's kind of helpful to not take things personally and just to just reflect on it. How could I make it better? And we tell the kids that too. It's like, even if they have a bad day, well, that's why we call it the fresh start school. Tomorrow's a fresh start. It didn't go as well, but we'll try again tomorrow. Kind of build that in.
And students are going to make mistakes and are not perfect, and even students that have been at us for a long time have bad days, and might have an emotional breakdown. It's okay, like, it happens to everybody.
That's why I have a lot of clinicians around too, so like the teacher, you hope the teacher feels supported, that they not have to be the clinician and the teacher at the same time, there will be people around to help with when those come up. And
the big key to that is not only being able to talk through it, it's about going, okay, so how are we going to handle this next time this happens? And a lot of this gets into TCI, therapeutic crisis intervention training, but a lot of it is going, okay, So we approached it this way, and it didn't really help the thing, because it probably isn't healthy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Getting them to acknowledge that, and then having them come up with a solution with you next time.
Yep.
So, and it's great, because when you see a student, like, a week from then, has the same, like, frustrations because of a similar reason, and they go to you and just go, Mr. Nick, can I go sit out in the living room for a few
Yeah.
minutes? And that's one of those coping strategies you talked about, and you say, go ahead, and it prevents something, you go.
Yeah.
That is so great. That's the thing that's so rewarding as a teacher.
Those big, that's kind of like a big victory.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it's nice to be able to go as a teacher and go, you know, I know it's using coping strategy, I'm really proud of you
Yeah,
for doing that.
Yeah, and it's not even like the lesson you're teaching. It's,
No.
but that's so important with just in general learning.
Yeah, and I use those moments to help, because sometimes we're learning about things that are hard to learn about, especially in US history,
Yeah.
we're doing early history.
Yeah, they need
There's a
those
lot of
big-
things in history that are hard to acknowledge sometimes. And imagine kids with autism who have a hard time acknowledging
Yeah.
these things, having to confront it,
Yeah.
and going, you know, I know it's not easy to talk about, but we need to talk about it because it's important.
Yep.
And giving them that space and going, look, if you need the space to take away, that's okay, but like, I'm here to work with you through it, and then seeing them using coping strategies and then work through it anyways,
Yeah.
and get something out of it.
That's great.
So that's where it all comes together nicely.
It all comes together, and I have a challenge for you
Okay.
for, in 1 minute, explain, because we only have so much time, explaining why learning music and learning the arts is so important for all students.
So.
In 1 minute.
So a lot of music teachers make the mistake of music is important, music is vital to life, and I don't take that approach at all. As a music teacher, for me, it's really about how music helps you in your everyday life. Especially for these kids, I take a music therapy approach, and I feel music therapy is really important because how do we actually use music in everyday life? We use it when we're studying, we use it to listen in the car, we use it when we have nothing to do, we need to take up some time.
Coping skills.
We need to use it when we need to focus and get away from everything in life. And I want them to be able to use it in that way too. I want them to be able to appreciate it and use it. And at the end of the day, that's what's important. And that's why music is so important.
Yeah, because I always think that people see the arts as like, oh, we don't need to learn that, but there's so much value in that. Thinking differently, thinking outside the box, feeling, because a lot of these students do think differently and do feel outside what the mainstream or what normal kids should be. So it kind of gives the avenue, right, to feel a little bit more comfortable with yourself. So it's so important.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's about showing them the importance of music in their life, but also relaying it to everything else they're learning. So they go, oh, it's not just about music, it's about, for example, learning about the Harlem Renaissance in history.
Yeah,
And talking about,
connects
okay, we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance right now because it's important to development of music as a whole, and going, music isn't just about its own little circle, it's affected by everything. And that's what's important.
And on that note, you get the trick.
And on that note, to quote Donna, see you later.
Yeah, that ends our episode for today. Thank you for joining us. Like us on Facebook and on Instagram. And we'll see you next week.